before the IMF adjustments, the rate of accumulation of public debt was also beginning to show an increased trend, despite Nana Akufo-Addo's pre-election promise to the contrary, that government was not going to borrow. My fellow countrymen and women, even with 3 oil fields and rebased GDP, this terrible trend of consumption-driven borrowing will not reverse anytime soon, and it is the main danger to the sustained growth of our economy. Countrymen and women, inappropriate utilization of Eurobond proceeds. Despite inflows of oil revenue and high levels of borrowing, most payments go into consumption. This contrasts with the massive investments in the projects that were done by the previous administration, especially infrastructure, social, and economic. In fact, the previous administration invested in educational infrastructure than a government that touts education at its highest priority. We built more schools, existing secondary schools, e-blocks for community day schools, basic schools, removal of schools under trees with relatively lower inflows from borrowed funds and just 1 oil field. We built hospitals, we built roads, we expanded telecom infrastructure, just name them. As a typical example, the NDC used the flow of petroleum and sovereign bond revenues under its watch to complement the construction of the Tuabo gas plants, Terminal 3 airport projects, schools, roads, water systems, extension of electricity, and to repay 500 million out of the 750 million of Ghana's first 2007 bond, which was contracted under the Kufuor administration, if you remember. We left money in the sinking fund to retire that bond in 2017 when we had left office. And so when somebody says his father didn't leave him anything, he left him money to pay a debt that was outstanding. Surprisingly, this government's capital expenditure is fast dwindling, despite resources from 2 additional oil fields, namely the 10 field and Sankofa field, and an existing oil field, which is the Jubilee field, with outputs currently exceeding 190,000 barrels of oil per day, and revenues peaking from below 1 billion Ghana cedis in 2016. We did not earn up to 1 billion Ghana cedis from the Jubilee field to, above several billions. Can you imagine that in 2018, the government borrowed 5.1 billion Ghana cedis from the Eurobond market, but used 1.2 billion Ghana cedis to support capital expenditure? And can you also imagine that 13.6 billion was borrowed, but used only 418 million Ghana cedis to support capital expenditure in 2019? As if these are not toxic enough, sadly, the government has programmed to borrow the equivalent of 17.1 billion Ghana cedis from the Eurobond market this year. But only 740 million Ghana cedis is supposed to be used to support capital expenditure. Where can an economy be going with this kind of prioritization? 17.1 billion, and you're budgeting only 740 million for capital expenditure. This clearly shows government's increasing appetite for borrowing highly denominated currency for consumption. Ladies and gentlemen, now let's talk about cocoa production and the cocoa sector. Prior to 2017, cocoa production was on a consistent rise for 3 consecutive years. In fact, cocoa output reached its second highest in the 2016-2017 year after we recorded the 1 million tons, if you remember, output. This was due to good policies implemented to increase cocoa farmers' access to fertilizers and other inputs, including new seedlings, free seedling project. Yes, free fertilizers, seedlings, and other inputs were distributed to farmers. Measures were also put in place by Cocoa Board to ensure that fertilizers and inputs given to farmers were tailored to their farm sizes. We measured their farms, and then we gave them the inputs to meet their farm sizes. But since this government took over, annual production has continued to decline, with no sign of improvement in the last production year to 811,250 tons, a shortfall of over 150,000 metric tons. The paradox of the declining trend is that we're constantly being told of the programs and interventions, including artificial pollination on a large scale, and yet output is consistently declining. Another sad development is that PBC Limited, which plays a very critical role in the supply chain of the cocoa industry, is collapsing. Cocoa Board depends on licensed buying companies to purchase the cocoa beans from cocoa farmers and hands it over to the board. All the takeover centers in Tema are the takeover centers in Tema and Kumasi. It is therefore unfortunate to note that the performance of Ghanaian-owned companies in this section of the supply chain is dwindling under this government. Ghanaian-owned licensed buying companies, their role in purchasing cocoa is dwindling. Ladies and gentlemen, PBC, a company with SNIT and GOG as majority shareholders, which used to be the largest buyer of cocoa from farmers under my administration, is suffocating under debt, and it is collapsing. The beneficiaries are foreign companies that are taking over the role that was played by PBC before. Meanwhile, government keeps touting local content and job creation. A new NDC administration will ensure that all cocoa farmers have access to all the necessary inputs according to their farm size in order to raise production. We revert to the pricing formula that ensured that the farmer was placed first and earned 70% of the international market price for cocoa. We will not abandon cocoa roads for 3 years only to come back and carry them out at a higher cost. And for election year purposes, cut sod for cocoa roads. We'll also strengthen cocoa processing companies to add greater value to our cocoa. Increase the number of companies that are processing cocoa in order that we can earn more money to stabilize our foreign exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. And as has become the style of these John Mahama live sessions, I'll be taking questions from my guests who are here in the studio, veteran financial journalists and economists, and also taking some questions from our online guests. And I'll start with my friends and my colleagues. I call you colleagues because I also have media training in here. So what you do is you just catch my eye, you tell me your name, you mention your media house, and then you can ask whatever question you want about the economy. Thank you and welcome once again.
Based on your estimation, the fiscal deficit is around 8%, has also given its verdict on Ghana's economy and revised the economic from stable to positive, and also praised the government for the financial sector reforms. How do you reconcile these particular ratings with your challenge of the government's figures that have been given so far?
The challenge is not my figures. I'm saying there's a discrepancy between the IMF figures and government figures. And I'm calling on government to reconcile the two. And I've given the reason between the two figures. It is because government is cooking the books. It's not accounting for some, figures that should be on budget. They're treating them offline and online. IMF has realized this and brought all that above line. So it's showing a deficit of 7%. And I'm saying that if you add the factoring, which is the payment of contractors using the fidelity system, it takes the budget deficit to even 8%. So it's not me saying it. My challenge is government should come and explain the difference between the last Article 4 figures that IMF has issued and the current figures that government, has given us. And the point I'm making is, Moody's would probably have looked at government's figures and used government figures to do their rating. But for a company like Moody's, my thinking is that they would look at the IMF figures too and say, but what is this discrepancy? Was our, adjustment of government's credit rating, based on the figures that we have seen, was it justified? It's for them to determine. Because even if you take the reserve figures, there's a discrepancy in the reserve figures. Government is putting its reserve figures at about $8 billion. IMF is putting government's international reserve figures at above 5-point-something billion. So there's a discrepancy in the figures. Government says 8-point-something billion covers 3-point-something% of imports. IMF believes that our reserve figures cover 2-point-something% of imports. So there's a huge discrepancy in the figures. We have always tried to align our fiscal with the international institutions in order to create transparency. You need transparency in order that investors can have trust in your economy. But where there's no transparency and there are discrepancies in the figures that you are putting out, and I remember our minority in parliament has called out the Bank of Ghana and said that the figures they are putting out are cooked. And so government should come clean and tell us what is happening. And that is what I've put to you today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President. My name is Erica Hianyu. I work for TVXYZ and Power FM. I want to stay with the issues about debt and then how we are reporting figures with regards to how government is churning out how much it is borrowing and how much it is spending. I've seen the IMF documents and I've also read around Moody's report. I have also seen concerns raised by the IMF, especially with regards to the rate at which we are borrowing, and most especially issues with the deficit you just made reference to. Now, in your presentation, you made reference to post-2020, and in 2021, if you become the president, I believe that many people will be looking at what you intend to do and how you want to manage the reality of how you want to deal with the reality as far as the books will be concerned, especially with reference to the misreported figures as you've made reference to, and what you think must be the actual situation on the ground.
As I said in the discourse that I just had, is that we're borrowing and spending on consumption, not on production and infrastructure. The best way to borrow is to invest in capital expenditure, because then that gingers productivity and increases your ability to be able to repay the debts you are taking. Unfortunately, this is not happening under this government. The bulk of the borrowing is going into consumption. And so the growth and all that is not reflecting in the real sector. Because if you are investing in capital expenditure and infrastructure and production, you see an increase in growth in the real sector. Unfortunately, all the growth that they are touting, 7% growth, something percent growth, is all coming from increased oil production and increased revenue from oil production. And if you are getting increased revenue from oil production, you must be channeling it, as the PRMA says, into capital expenditure. Unfortunately, that's not happening. All the increased monies that we're getting in terms of oil is going into consumption. And so you can't run a sustainable economy based on borrowing, increased revenues, and investing in consumption rather than in the real sector. And so we'll have to realign that whole fiscal framework. It's going to be tough. And so for me, I'm thinking post-2021, and thinking about the budget post-2021 and the adjustments and reforms that have to be made to make the growth that we have sustainable. And so we have a policy working group working on that. Eventually, we'll give you all the details and all that. But we want government to be transparent so that we don't take over and say, oh, after all, the accounting that was done was not real. And that's why we're drawing your attention to it. So that government will come and tell us what are the real figures. We don't want to take over and day two, we say, oh, the deficit was actually 9% and not 4.9% as government, had indicated. So these are the issues that I have raised. But I think that was a very good question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, proud to the 2016, my name is Modiana Ninate and I'm reporting for Pan African Television. Proud to the 2016 election, Dr. Baumia was eloquent just as he was passionate in running and ruining your administration, and he managed to talk about the economy, and how sure, and I know you recall that the famous quote from Baobia that the fundamentals of the economy are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. It's been 3 years now, almost 4 years to his administration of the NPP. How would you assess their management of the economy, just opposing same to yours?
Well, thank you very much. I remember that when those comments were made, I said to my brother, Dr. Baumia, and his flag bearer, Nana Akufo-Addo, that they had never run a country before, and they had never been president before, and so they don't know the challenges of managing that position. I'm sure today they see the reality, and I would have hoped that Baumia will give another lecture at Central University and say some of the same theoretical things he used to say. You don't run an economy from textbooks. You don't run an economy with economic lectures. Running an economy takes practical work, determination, and prioritization. Public finance is a completely different thing. You need to work at it. You need to understand it. You need to see where public resources should be channeled to give you the best outcomes. And that's why when we're in government, one of the things we did with my finance minister, he's here, we said that, look, we cannot continue piling on the public debt. We must find a way where that public debt is sustainable, and we put in place mechanisms where when we borrow the debt can pay for itself. Terminal 3, we did off government debt. Ghana Airport Company, when they borrowed it, they said, look, give us our 60% of the passenger service levy you take from us. And if you give it to us, we'll build Terminal 3 and we will finance the project ourselves. I saw the finance minister. I said, Finance Minister, can you give them back their 60%? Because the passenger service levy was $100 per passenger. And government was taking $60 and giving them $40. And so Ghana Airport Company was financing all their operations with $40 of passenger service levy. So he said, oh, we factored it into the budget this year. So I assured them that in 2016, we'll give them back their $60. And so they can start negotiating for it. They did. They negotiated for it. They got Stanbic, African Development Bank, and all of them to come on board as a consortium and finance Terminal 3. The next budget, we took out their $60, 60% of revenue, and restored their full revenue. And they put it into a collateralized account, a debt service account. And so Terminal 3 is there. Their money is going there. Whatever the agreement is, the banks are taking out their financing. So it's this innovative kind of borrowing. We can do dualization of our major roads and toll them, and collateralize the tolls, make the tolls to be collected better in terms of reducing human discretion. Let people buy their toll tickets in advance, put a sticker on their car. When they get to the toll booth, it will open by itself. You don't need somebody to press a button and open it. And then the money that is paid goes into a collateral account to pay for the cost of the road. And so it takes innovation and smart thinking to be able to do all these. They hadn't been in government before. They were very naive, asked 170 theoretical questions. Then today you come and set up 40-man committee to understand why the Forex is, first year university students will tell you why the CD is declining against foreign exchange. And so you don't need that Forex committee. We all know why it is depreciating. If you have higher demand for foreign exchange against supply, it will depreciate. If you have an economy that is import dependent and you're not exporting enough, your foreign exchange position will depreciate. You don't need a committee to come and tell you this. A lecturer friend of mine, and I'll publish an assignment he gave to first-year economic students, and he asked them, if you were on the 40-member committee, what would you assign to the CD depreciation? And they did the assignment, and they analyzed it. I have a copy. I'll publish it on my Facebook so that everybody will see. First-year university students have analyzed why the CD is depreciating. Why do you need a 40-man, committee to tell you why the CD is depreciating?
Okay, thank you very much.
So
Okay, let's go here. Then after that, we'll come to you and then to you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I will start from where you just left off. First-year university student will be able to analyze why the CD has been depreciating. Now, I believe, I remember some of your promises you made when the CD depreciation actually started running around 2013, 2014. And I would like to know, just a couple of sub-questions under this. CD depreciation, banking sector crisis, how would you have handled them differently if you were in power? Then also, under your government, ESLA was introduced and the Infrastructural Development Fund were introduced under your government. How do you see the management and the delivery on the real intent for the setting up of these today? And how would you have done those differently if you were in power? My name is Justice Lee Adubo. I represent the News Agency of China and CNC Television. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. We introduced certain new innovations. One was Exim Bank, if you remember. That was supposed to leverage financing to expand exports, to expand exports. Because one of the things you need to do to stabilize your currency is that you must export more and bring in the foreign currency that you need. And so we introduced the Exim Bank, Ghana Exim. And we started to accumulate money in it. And the intention was that the money should go into the productive sector to boost exports. Since we left office, I don't know how that fund is being managed, but obviously, I mean, I don't think that we're seeing any real benefit from Exim's injection into the export sector. And some of the money is going into hotels and other things. You wonder whether those are the real priorities to expand, you know, your exports. We introduced the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. And the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund was supposed to serve as our sovereign fund. And we're supposed to leverage it in order that we can borrow for infrastructure development. Some of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund money, we left about $270 million. We put it in UBA. I hear part of the money was taken and put in Unibank. And when Unibank collapsed, part of that money went with the Unibank collapse. Aside from that, you don't know what GIF really has been used for. And it's not serving the purpose for which it was put. Then we also set up the sinking fund. And the sinking fund was meant to contain money so that as and when our debts fall due, we would be able to, you know, amortize those debts without any problem, major problem to the economy. So before we left office, we left money in the sinking fund. And as I said in my statement, that was the money that was used to retire the first Kufuor Eurobond. If you remember, it was 700 and something million. It fell due in 2017. And if we hadn't left money in there, the new government that came in August, September would have had to cough up $500 million, which it wouldn't have. And so we made sure that that money was left there. Of course, we hope we will win the election. And so we didn't want to win the election and come, and then the money is due, and then we don't have it. So we put it there. And so when this government came, I mean, it was easy for them to sort out the first Eurobond and all that. Unfortunately, same is not being done. What we did was we capped the stabilization fund. So any excess in the stabilization fund was automatically transferred. So these were all innovations that we brought in to ensure a better management of the economy. Unfortunately, I cannot say same for now. And so if you just have growth that is being fueled because you have additional oil revenue, and because of that you say we're the fastest growing economy in Africa, and so on and so forth, you understand? And all you're doing is spending on consumption. You're not improving the roads. All the hospitals that were being built to improve access to health care, you have brought them to a standstill, and instead you are glorifying in distributing ambulances. Where do ambulances take sick people? They take them to hospitals. And so our priority should be to finish the hospitals, so that if an accident happens and you pick the patient, you have a good facility to send them to. And yet, Fomina Hospital, Kumawu Hospital, Abetifi Hospital, Bekwai Hospital, Tepa Hospital, Upper West Regional Hospital in Wa, Bogatanga Hospital, all those hospitals we started. University of Ghana Medical Center, Bank Hospital, International Maritime Hospital have all come to a standstill. And yet you are distributing ambulances. And so you pick the person and send them where? And they say there's no bed. And then you get there, they have to put a plastic chair in accident and emergency for the people to sit in. I mean, there's a complete loss of prioritization. And it's not the first time ambulances have been given. In 2012-2013, we brought 161 ambulances. We did not make posters and say we're distributing ambulances and so on and so forth. Yes, you have brought ambulances, fine. We brought ambulances, we brought fire engines. Almost every district got a fire engine. I didn't go and stand and make posters that I was distributing fire engines. There are many other things that we did without, it's government's obligation to do it. We gave the police more than 1,000 vehicles, the highest number of vehicles the police have ever had in the history of Ghana. Do you remember that I went and stood and touted it to high heaven? These are things that government must do, but we must get our priorities right.
His Excellency, banking, I really want to. I want to. I really want to.
Let's take it.
So that's
My name is
my
George.
question.
That's
Actually my questions. I want to add a follow-up. Sorry.
I want to take you to the cocoa production area. You talked of things that issues that you initiated to improve cocoa production in Ghana. But I think they were somehow stalled after the change of the government. What detailed plan do you have in 2021 if you become president of Ghana again for the sector?
See, the thing about agriculture is that if you put inputs, you will reap the output. If you put input, the correct input, in the period of gestation of the product, you will reap the output. But if you pretend that you are putting the input and you're not putting it in, the output will expose you. And that's exactly what's happening. If this government is doing well with inputs into cocoa sector, why is cocoa production dwindling? We noticed a reduction in cocoa production, and so we said, look, why do we sell the fertilizer to the farmers? Let's give it to them. Because if you ask them to buy it, he will say he doesn't have money and he won't apply the fertilizer. If he doesn't apply the fertilizer, the cocoa output drops. So give it to him for free. Once he asks it for free, he will apply it. And when he applies, his output will go up. And if output goes up, you'll be able to buy more cocoa. And that's why we brought the free fertilizer program. Not only in terms of increasing output of existing cocoa plantations or farms, but also to distribute 20 million seedlings. The next year, we increased it to 60 million seedlings. Volta region, especially the OT part from Hohoi upwards, a lot of people don't know it's a cocoa growing area. In the colonial time, they used to produce cocoa. Unfortunately, it dwindled. And so we set up a seedling farm there. And we recruited young cocoa farmers and we gave them the seedlings because we wanted to boost the cocoa production in that area from less than 5,000 tons. Our aim was to boost it to 50,000 tons, 10 times. And then all the other regions, we set up these seedling banks, and the farmers were taking the seedlings for free. They didn't pay for them. In addition, we said, look, anytime we go for consortium financing, let's take additional money. Let's reserve $150 million for cocoa roads so that we can improve the roads in the 5 cocoa growing regions so that when the cocoa is produced, we can send transport in there and take the cocoa out. And so we gave contracts to farmers to do cocoa roads, and they started work. And the new government came and terminated it, refused to pay them. There are several contractors who were doing cocoa roads who have died. Some are sick, they can't pay for their hospital bills because government says we're investigating the roads. And for 3 years, they refused to pay the contractors. Some of the roads that they did, and cocoa grows in the place where you have the highest rainfall. And so there are places where they gravel the road, preparing it for bitumen, and government says stop work. Today, if you go, all that gravel is washed away. If you want to go and do that road again, you have to come and spend more money to do that road. Some of the contractors today owe the banks. The equipment have been seized. And today, even some of the banks that gave them the money to go and do the contracts have collapsed and are under receivership. So you say you're paying contractors. As soon as you release money to them, the money is in his name and the receiver's name. And the receiver says, I'm not interested in giving you money to go back to that contract. My job is to collect the money that you owe the bank. So you pay the contractor 5 million Ghana cedis, and then it takes all the 5 million Ghana cedis. Yet you say, oh, we paid the contractor, so they're going back to work. Oh, your contractor is coming back because we paid him 5 million cedis. He doesn't have the money to go back. That is the reality. And so when President Akufo-Addo says, oh, we paid your husband's money, so Christmas will be good. Ask the contractors. Christmas was the worst Christmas they've ever had, you know. And yet, the expectation that they've created with your family is that, oh, you've been paid. And so the suspicion is that, oh, if you've been paid, then you are taking the money somewhere else. And it's not good. It's not good for our politics, you know.
Mine is a follow-up to the cocoa sector, still the cocoa sector. Yeah.
I have the banking crisis, banking sector crisis, yeah.
And then I will just talk about it.
We'll take 3 more, and then we'll go online for a little while, and then we'll come out.
Okay.
So let's take the cocoa. Yeah. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so my name is Najak Bliago with GBC Radio. Yeah, still on the cocoa sector. One thing that comes to mind is that PBC is at the brink of collapse, almost off, if not dead. And legacy debts has been one of the main problems affecting the company. Workers have demonstrated they not being paid for months and all that. Talking about policies that you are streamlining, should you come to power in 2021 or the years ahead, what stringent measures are you going to put in place to revamp PBC?
Yeah. Okay. PBC is a state-owned enterprise that we all have known as a major player in the cocoa sector for years. And what we did was PBC floated as a company on the stock exchange, and Ghanaians invested in it. And in our time, PBC was the largest buyer of cocoa. They had a fleet of trucks. That company, we took it, it was moribund, we rebuilt it. Aside from being able to buy so much cocoa, they also even set up a share butter processing plant in Bupe. And so it was like PBC was growing by leaps and bounds. Today, PBC is a sorry state of itself. And it's not only PBC. Most state-owned enterprises that were handed over to this government are in a very, very sorry state. Bost, when we took Bost, was highly indebted. Bost bounced back, paid off a lot of its debts, restructured itself, and Bost started exporting petroleum products to Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from the Bolga depot. And they were bringing into Bank of Ghana something like $6 million every 2 weeks from petroleum sales to neighboring countries. Today, that business has collapsed. If you go to the Bolga depot, there's no truck there. They're not loading from Bolga depot. So they're dispatching petroleum from here. And when they dispatch the petroleum, somehow it's meant for export. So they don't pay the taxes, ESLA and all that. And then it disappears into the system. And it's sold at the prevailing rates. And so people are making more money. And I saw recently they said MPA has saved Ghana how many, this. No, that thing is still happening. Vehicles are being taken as export products, petroleum, and they're being sold in the system, and people are making money out of them. But PBC can be resuscitated if we have dedicated leadership. And if government encourages it and works to protect, state enterprises. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I mean, this government doesn't seem interested in state enterprises. And I can understand because they are a conservative government. They believe in private ownership of everything. They don't believe that the state should be involved in anything. We believe that there should be a competition between the state and private. And so there are state-owned enterprises that would do well. I mean, if you take Gihok Distilleries has survived. It is providing employment. It is competing with Casapreco and all of them. You understand? And in our time, Gihok Distilleries was one of the best performing state-owned enterprises. They pay their own salaries. They look after themselves. They don't rely on government for anything. It was the same with PBC, the same with Bost, But today, if you take away the Bost margin, Bost will collapse like a pack of cards, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yes.
Your Excellency, I am for
There was
the
a question on the
banking.
banking sector.
Yes, I have
Yeah.
a follow-up. I want to find out, when you were in power, how much was injected to address the toxic in the sector? And as we are seeing the cleanup now, it didn't happen when you were there. I also want to find out, give us in concrete terms what you would do differently to remain a worry, and not just those in the banking sector, but even those of us who sit at the back. How are you going to handle such a situation and ensure it doesn't really happen again?
When we're in government, the red flag was being waved on the banking sector. And so we started the processes for bringing things back on track. And so we started the depositors insurance scheme and all the other laws that we passed in order to improve the regulation of the banking. They panicked or whatever happened. But certainly the route, the harm done helped. Then people who have their monies in the bank begin to wonder, what if this bank collapses? And look, there's no bank. If you have a run on a bank, take Lloyd's or any bank, no bank has 100% of depositors' money sitting down so that when they come and ask for it, you give it to them. Because they invest the money. And that is why when you come, not everybody will come one day and ask for his money. And so as they invest the money brings profit and the bank grows. So if you create an atmosphere where people do not have trust in the banks and they believe that there's something going to happen to these banks, everybody will come and take their money out. And that's what started happening. I have a banker friend, he said, I don't know what's happening. Anytime we open the doors, everybody's trying to take money. Nobody is coming to deposit. And that is because the government has said, we're giving you a deadline. Even before the deadline had reached, they kept touting it and saying, by this time, if you don't, then the banks will go, oh, we've got this investor who want to do this and this and that. And then they created all kinds of situations that were not the best. Now, what we will do, and I said it in my other Facebook Live, is that we will work to restore the participation of indigenous Ghanaian business in the financial sector. Because the financial sector is critical. And finance is something that everywhere in the world, every country makes sure that the finance sector, it has indigenous participation. When we came into office, all the big banks were foreign owned. It was a deliberate policy to allow Ghanaians to invest in the financial sector. And that is why we encouraged UT. UT was a savings and loan company. We encouraged them to take a banking license and become a bank. Unibank was encouraged to set up a bank. All the banks, the Ghanaian banks that were set up, we did not have them. We had Nigerian banks, Access, Guarantee Trust Bank, and all the other, Zenith Bank and others. Then you had the top tier banks, Barclays, Stanbic, EcoBank, Stanchart, and all of them. There were no Ghanaian banks, except for Prudential and a few of them. And so it was a deliberate policy to increase Ghanaian participation in the banking sector. Today, that is wiped out.
Mr. President, I wanted to just stampede and ask a follow-up related question.
Yes.
I'm sorry to do this.
I was just going to wrap it up. Just 1 minute.
Right.
So we will restore Ghanaians' investment in the financial sector, and we'll do it this way. All banks do not cater to the same segment of the market. Yeah? There are top banks that cater to a certain segment of the market. There are smaller banks. If you go anywhere in the world, there are different banks with different capitalization that cater to different segments of the market. You can't come out and say every bank must have 400 million capital reserve. It's not necessary. You can have different tiered banks, and that is what we're going to do. We're going to have 3-tiered banking. You can have Class B banks, $200 million capital reserve. You are in this segment of the market. And then you can have the Class A banks, the huge banks, 400 million and above. And everybody would be, you just have to improve regulation, that's all. And so our policy working group is working on how to regulate the banking system, but to let everybody enter at the segment of the market that they want to do. The big banks, the Class A banks, are not good at SME lending because they can't handle the risk. The indigenous banks were better at handling the risk at the SME level than the bigger banks. And so our policy working group is working on these, and at the right time we'll bring all those out. But I think that government pushed this too quickly, it has created a huge debt for the taxpayer, almost 30 billion cedis to guarantee depositors' funds. And the point is, there's no way, the president has said, we'll pay depositors in full. That is not going to happen in 2020. If government even will pay that money, it's going to be spread out over the next 4 years. And so depositors cannot sit and think that this year they're going to get their money. But of course, we believe that because of what government did, we do owe depositors the right to receive their monies back.
To ask is that we've seen documents suggesting that the collapse of some of these banks were deliberate.
Yes.
And it is not related to what has come out this week about Unity. Will your government, if you come to power in 2021, be interested in investigating the real cause of the collapse of some of these banks?
Yeah. And did not contribute to the state in which some of the banks were. And so we need to investigate that and isolate that. But then we also need to look at the other issues. You know, was government too hasty because of some other reason that we don't know? I don't want to attribute bad faith to anybody, but like you're saying, there are little things that we're seeing. You know, I mean, recently I saw this Attorney General's opinion about the closure of Unibank. And the point is, if it's real, I don't know, and that's why I'm being very careful with what I say. If that document is authentic and the Attorney General said it's not legal to close this bank and all that, why would we have done what we did? And couldn't we have given the banks time to realign their position, bring them back on board? There are some that were moribund, has another case of fraud against him before the court. So because of that, you know, whatever investment he made in the bank must have been fraudulent. And so you close the bank. It is important for the people of Ghana to know. And if we come into office, we're going to take, they didn't go through the procedure. I mean, people have legal rights that they can resort to.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay,
yes, you have been waiting for a long time.
My name is that overlapped an election. There's a school of thought that what we see now, the growth that we see, was a scientific consequence of the decisions that had been taken as part of the IMF program.
Yes.
So one, do you regret doing that? And then two, you're in a country where 50% of our revenue goes to pay debt. The rest pays salary. Then there's almost nothing left.
Is it 50%? It's more than...
Now it is more. Now we have leverage oil. It's gone. Cocoa is technically gone because we've taken loads of loans. Then gold is also on the verge of going because there's an IPO that is coming up that's reaching up to about 750 million.
Based on the royalties from gold.
Precisely. Yeah. Then the last bit is bauxite, which is also on the verge. All things being equal.
To the Chinese,
now, what space will you have to prosecute your projects in the event that you win the next election?
This is exactly what Ghanaians should know. That this government is mortgaging the future of this country for today's spending. You've listed them all. And that is the danger we face. Because look at Get Fund. They are mortgaging Get Fund receipts for the next, how many years? 10 years or so. And so it means that in future, there will be no Get Fund revenues to look at. They are looking at taking our 10% reserve in gold investments and our royalties and mortgaging it and taking loans against it. You see, for a government that said you can develop this country without borrowing, it is the greatest political con that Ghanaians have ever been subjected to. ESLA, which we introduced, which was criticized, was going to be collateralized for 5 to 7 years to pay off legacy energy sector debt. They came and decided that the structure we had put, they didn't want it, so they discarded it. Stanbic was the lead bank, and all the banks that we owed energy sector debt, we had taken off the penal interest, negotiated the debt with them, and agreed what the debt was to everybody. And so ESLA was going to be collateralized, and based on a waterfall, everybody was going to get proportionally what he was due. They said, no, we don't want it. We'll float a bond. Today, as and when space comes in ESLA, like when they did the increase in ESLA, it's being mortgaged again to increase the length, take additional money and mortgage the bond. So we're going to continue paying ESLA for the God knows how many years more. It's mortgaged. We cannot remove ESLA because it has been collateralized for 10 years, 15 years or more. You see, and the point is every single fiscal space that you can use to leverage and put into production is being mortgaged by this government. A government that said we won't borrow and said that we had borrowed excessively. But the point is, whatever borrowing we did in my time, you could see the investment into which it was being put. You could see the infrastructure, you could see the roads, you could see the electricity, you could see the water. I mean, just tell me, 98 billion Ghana cedis down the line, show me what is there in capital expenditure and infrastructure. Show me one hospital. Show me a new secondary school. Show me a new water system. Show me roads. You just go and take asphalt. That is the danger that we have. And so for me, my thinking is not about the election and the biometric register. I think, yes, somebody will win. For me, the greater thing that occupies my thoughts is after we have won, how are we going to adjust the reforms again? How are we going to reform so that we can put this economy back on a sustainable track? You are right. I don't regret that we went into the IMF because we needed policy credibility. Whatever we did, our international partners said, how are we sure that you implement this, your homegrown fiscal program? We went to Senchi, we called everybody and said, come and let's think, we will need a fiscal consolidation program. NPP refused to participate. The day before the Senchi program, they issued a fiat and said that any of their members who participated will be sanctioned. So they didn't come. Osafo had said he would come, he didn't come at the last minute. The only person who came was Kwame PNM and a few, but others who were active members of the party didn't come. And yet it was out of Senchi that we got the homegrown fiscal consolidation plan that we took to the IMF, and the IMF signed on it. They hardly changed anything in our homegrown fiscal consolidation plan. And one of the things that I'm proud of is we reduced central bank borrowing to 5%. And then in 2016, we reduced it to 0. So everything that was financed under government's expenditure was based on government's own revenue. Of course, it took our fiscal deficit up to 6 point something if you look at the rebase figures now. But, I mean, you could see discipline coming into public finance. Unfortunately, that discipline has been destroyed completely. And we will do our best. Our policy working group is looking at the figures and seeing what we need to do immediately after we take over, how we can restructure and put the economy back on a sustainable path of growth.
My name is Norman Akwaheford. I'm with Joy Business at Multimedia. I wanted to quickly find out from you, knowing very well that the deficit now, as projected by the IMF, is around 7%.
Yes.
We know that the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the law says it should be around 5% or something.
Yes.
Good.
It should not go above 5%.
About 5%.
Yes.
Good. Great. Now, at the time government or the finance minister was going to Parliament, the IMF board had not met, and so the report that we see today wasn't available. If you were the president, I want to find out from you, what would you recommend is done? Are you going to sack your finance minister? Are you going to go back to Parliament to do some corrections? What exactly will you do? And then when it comes to the assurance that the president did give with regards to paying all depositors their funds, knowing very well that the receiver is in court, with some of the shareholders going after them, trying to, recover these things. If you were in that position, it's not just assurance you would have given to Ghanaians who are waiting for their money.
Well, I think that the president should be truthful with Ghanaians and give them a realistic time frame for recovering their monies. Because we're in an election year, he's creating the impression that Ghanaians are going to receive their monies this year. Everybody wants his money in the shortest possible time. And the president says, we'll pay you your deposits in full. That's what he said. And yet, if you look at the budget, there's no provision for paying. And if you look at the quantum of depositors, claims that have to be reimbursed, there's no way that these can be paid this year. And so the president should come out clean with Ghanaians and say, look, we can't pay you all this money this year. Where getting to September, October, people haven't seen their monies. Because right now, the maximum they're paying is 20% of depositors' claims. 20,000. of 20,000. So if you have 1 million, you get 20,000. You have 10,000 or you have 100,000, you get 20,000. And it's going to create, some dissonance with people when they realize that government is not in a position to pay them as quickly as they want. And I think that the president should come out clear and let people understand what the situation is. But the other point you made.
Yeah, with the deficit as it is now.
Yes. The Fiscal Responsibility Act was passed.
Yes.
And nobody forced the government to pass the Fiscal Responsibility Act. They went there and passed it and capped fiscal deficit at 5%. And there are penalties in there for breaching the 5% fiscal deficit. And so the finance minister is in a bit of trouble. If it turns out that the fiscal deficit is 7%, then he must submit himself to the laws of Ghana and pay the sanction thereof. And so the law has been passed by Parliament. I don't think that anybody is going to amend it and increase the deficit. It's there, it's 5%. And so it means that he's breached the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and he must submit himself to the will of the people of Ghana.
What would you have done if you were the president? What would you have done to your finance?
I would have abided by the law.
Okay. I am Maxwell Adumbila for Daily Graphic and Graphic Business. Two quick questions. One of our major problems as a country is election year overruns.
Yeah.
We've had it virtually since '92, and it's been with us. You have had that experience painfully in 2 election years. We are entering an election, and it's very keen. Normally, it is the ability of the opposition to win that pushes the government to either spend within or spend above to be able to win. Based on your experiences, what advice would you give the current government in order not to jeopardize the fiscal stance that we have now? And then 2, one of the challenges we also have relates to election cycle entrepreneurship, where when NPP is in power, you have certain block of entrepreneurs doing well. When NDC is in power, you have another block doing well. But for a nation to grow beyond the current position we are and bridge the poverty gap, we need to have entrepreneurs that can span the length of time that the country will exist.
Yep.
How can we break that gist and ensure continuity in local entrepreneurship? Thank you.
Fantastic question. Thank you very much. Election year overruns have been the bane of our economic management. And I think I talked about it in the 2016 State of the Nation address. And I said that we were looking to break that jinx and make sure that we maintain fiscal discipline even in an election year. Unfortunately, because we had gone into an IMF program, our thinking was that the IMF would have given us some fiscal space to make room for election year expenditures. Unfortunately, they didn't. And often election year expenditures, because of the costs of registration, the cost of all those things, you can go above the fiscal fiction. And so eventually when the outturn came and the figures came in, the Electoral Commission's budget was not properly catered for in the budget. And that's why we had a deficit, which if you use the rebase figures now, is put at 6-point-something%. But we could have kept within budget if we didn't have those election-related expenses. Now, I find it strange that the government comes and says that we don't want any foreign funding for our elections. The government has said it. They say they're going to finance the elections themselves. And these are even years where we were getting foreign financing for some parts of the election expenditure. If you can get some financing from foreign and international community to fund some part of the election expenditure, you say, I don't want it. I don't know what thinking has gone into that. Who doesn't take free money? It says, oh, we'll pay for the biometric machines, or we'll pay for this part, or we'll pay for training. Why? I'll take it. But government says, we don't want your money. We're going to run our election ourselves. Now look at the costs that are coming already. It says new register. Already 400 and something million. That is to change the data center, put the new equipment and all that. But that is not all the expenditure. Then now you have to train the officers who are going into the field. You have to deploy them to go and capture the registration of Ghanaians. That is bringing the cost to about 800 and something million, almost $1 billion Ghana cedis. Why would you do this to yourselves? And you say, oh, we don't want any foreign financing. That is what this government has gotten itself into. And already the IMF is saying that your possible end-of-year budget is going to end at 7%. If you add all this additional expenditure, and Electoral Commission hasn't finished yet. This is just the registration. After that, there are all kinds of other expenses, including election day expenses and all that. And so it is obvious that we probably would have an overrun. You know, there's already an overrun. I mean, because the budget deficit is 7%, then there's already, you know, it's higher than anticipated. And so if you add election year expenses, then that will be a problem. But we need to keep fiscal discipline, whether in election year or out of election year. And the way you can do it is if you can get help from people, and they say, we will help you to do training of your electoral officers. Why not? I'll take it.
The entrepreneurship.
Yes. Entrepreneurs, yes. That is the bane of Ghanaian business. We like to categorize our business people. And so if you see a business, an existing business, we want to see whether the owner is NDC or MPP or something like that. And based on where people perceive you to be, you either not get assistance from government or government will be more hostile to you or something. Forgetting that the private sector and these business people are doing part of government's job for it by employing people. Government is responsible for creating jobs. Now, if somebody has invested his money and created a business and he is employing 100 people, 200 people, you say because the owner is perceived not to be inclined towards the ruling party, you destroy his business. You're putting 200 people on the street and expanding your unemployment problem. You already have all these young people coming out of school. You can't find jobs for them. And then you have existing businesses that, by grace of God, have employed people, and then you say because they are not positively inclined towards your party, you destroy their business. You're cutting your nose to spite your face. And it doesn't matter which party is in power. Everybody is a Ghanaian. Everybody is entitled to the services of this nation. Everybody is entitled to invest and make money. And I don't see why not. And so if somebody qualifies to do a job and it's a government job, give it to him. Look at what happened. They employed a new director of Ghana Health Services. Then some funny group petitions and say, oh, he's an NDC man. 2 weeks in office, they sack him because he's NDC. So if you are NDC, you are not a Ghanaian. And so when MDC comes back, and then we put the shoe on the other foot, and they appoint somebody and people petition and say, oh, he's MPP. So when a certain government is in power, everybody else from the other power are no longer Ghanaians. They are not entitled to benefit from the state. It doesn't make sense. It's absolutely, absolutely insensible. Until we open the opportunities to Ghanaians, no matter your ethnic or political orientation, this country is not going to go anywhere. Because 4 years, you get all the benefits, and definitely power will shift, as we've seen from 1992. Power will shift at one time or the other. It can be 8 years, it can be 4 years, power will shift. And so if you enjoy the largesse of government because you are positively inclined, and then a new government comes, and then your business suffers, and then another government comes, and somebody's business prospers, that's what makes our growth not sustainable. Let me go quickly online. They've been waiting for a while. So let me take our online guest. From Victor Odoi. Mr. President, would you encourage a petition to the IMF and World Bank to review these discrepancies? And what would be the impact of these discrepancies on our economic management going forward? The IMF has published the Article 4 report. And so it's a public document. And so I'm asking the government to reconcile their figures and the IMF figures and tell us what the true position is. And so that's a challenge I'm throwing to government. I'm not going to petition the IMF. The IMF has already come out with what their figures are. So it's for the two organizations to reconcile their figures. Tulip Abdul, what will your new government do to address the development gap in the nation? It has always been Accra, Tema, and Kumasi. Yeah. Until we spread the development of this country geographically. And so if you are from towns, you're seeing slums exist. And that is why we need to spread out economic opportunity. In my Facebook Live I did before, I talked about staple crop processing zones. And I said that we're going to make agro-processing and agribusiness a focus of our next administration. And we're going to map out the country into the comparative advantages that they have in terms of agriculture. And so if it's a rice growing area, we know that we need to put capacity to process rice. And so we'll put rice hulling machines, we'll put factories that can mill rice and process rice and all that. If the major crop grown is ginger, we'll put a factory that processes ginger powder, ginger oil, ginger paste and all that for export. If it's an area that grows fruits, you put in a fruit processing plant that will do that. And all these with private sector, because government will support the private sector to be able to do it. What you need to do, and that's why we did the Exim Bank, to be able to give the private sector the equipment and the capital to set up and make money and pay the Exim over time. And so these are some of the things that we will crystallize in order that we spread out the development. I said in my Facebook Live that when you take, in economics, when you take location of industries, they do not conform to political delimitations. And so if you say one district, one factory, you're talking about political delineations. And so that's why government is having problem. One district, one factory doesn't make sense because the value chain in a particular industry can go beyond political boundaries. So better to isolate them as staple crop processing zones. And so if you have a zone that is doing good in cashew, what do? You put more cashew processing plants there. It might not match with the districts, but they'll be in the particular processing zone where they can process the cashew for export and for local consumption. And so we are not going to do one district, one factory. But if we come and they have some ongoing one district, one factories, we'll continue and complete them. But we will replace it with staple crop processing zones where we will take the comparative advantage of a particular area and we'll put the processing capacity there to be able to make full use of the potential that the area has. And we want more hospital roads from you, GM, and more E-blocks. And that's Corex. Corex is saying that. I believe that healthcare is important, and that is why we say in every district we should have a modern health facility. And I said that it can be from a health center to a polyclinic to a district hospital to a regional hospital. And so depending on the population of the district, it is possible that a health center, modern health center, will suit them. Depending on the population of the district, you need a polyclinic or a district hospital. So we'll do that survey and we'll make sure that every district has a modern health center so that people don't have to travel long distances to seek health care. E-blocks will continue the e-blocks that were abandoned. We'll fast track them indeed so that we can ease the congestion in the secondary schools. And like I said, we're going to map out existing secondary schools that are in high density urban areas. And we're going to take some of their land and build e-blocks on the school land. Other e-blocks will complete them so that children don't have to travel very long distances to be able to access education. And once we do that, it will ease the congestion in the existing schools. Benjamin Nyane is asking, the NPP claimed they inherited a bad economy, even though their senior minister made a contrary statement to that. What is your response to that criticism? Well, I would say that it is their perception of what they inherited. We had very serious challenges with the economy when I took over as president. We had a doomsday, which was the power crisis, because demand for electricity, outstripped our ability to supply. So we needed to solve that and increase generation so that we could pass demand. This was a legacy problem. It's not like when I became president, suddenly there was no more power. It was power demand had been growing and we had not kept pace with the power demand. So it meant that we had to put in extra generation quickly. So we had to invest in generation. The full implementation of single spine, including payment of arrears for single spine. By the time we paid wages and salaries and paid interest on loans and things, we had about 73% of total tax revenue gone. And so we needed to adjust. And that is why in 2013, 2014, I had to implement austerity. It is not something any president wants to do, but you do it because it's in the larger interest. You get insulted, you get criticized, but you do it so that the economy can turn around. By 2015, 2016, we had begun to see that turnaround, to the extent that, like you said, I predicted that in 2017, we'll see 8% growth. The IMF agreed with me and said that in 2017, we'll see 8% growth. And that is because of the work that we had done. And so this government was just landed the 8% growth because of increased oil revenues and all that. All that work in the new oil fields was done by my administration. I remember the 10 field and the Sankofa field, there were issues between GM. Look, you guys, go to Akosombo. Go and sit there. And don't come back to Accra until you come back with an agreement. And so that was the first time you had GMPC to the eyes. And that's how come the program of development for 10 field and Sankofa went to Parliament into service. And President Akufo-Addo had the opportunity to commission the FPSO, John Ajikum Kufuor, is it? Yeah. And so that was it. So that's it. And from Hekings Glover, Ho Airport and dualization of Sokode to Ho have been left dormant. What will you do when you come into power? Like I said, we'll continue existing programs. What I think we should do is to put a moratorium on starting new projects. We'll have a priority investment program, which will have the projects we intend to undertake as a priority. But then we're going to look at existing projects that have been abandoned and work and finish those before we take on any major new projects. And so all these projects that are ongoing, Eastern Corridor Road and all of them, E-blocks, hospitals that have come to a standstill, all of them, we will continue them and finish them before we start any major new projects. But of course, projects like the new regional hospitals that I promised are projects that we'll start working on immediately. Dualization of Accra-Kumasi Road. We're going to Accra-Kumasi, Accra-Cape Coast, Accra-Aflao. We're going to do them on a BOT basis. And so there will be toll plazas where the money collected as tolls will go to pay them so that they are not sitting on our public debt in the way that it is. Let's come back to my guest in here. Yes.
It's Eric Mawena with Star FM. So we've seen this government set up policies, particularly for the private sector. And so we've seen a ministry like the Business Development Ministry and the likes. First off, I want to pick your thoughts on how well these initiatives this government have implemented for the private sector has fared, looking at the fact also that in 2019, the ease of doing business reports, the country fell 4 places.
Yeah.
And so I want to pick your thoughts on that. And what specific policies do you have in store for private sector when you are to win the next elections? And then this week, there was news that came in that New Plan Company Limited was closing down because of lack of contracts from government. And you've made mention of the fact that state enterprises are struggling. What are you going to do? Because they also make reference to the point that in 2016, they sought to get more shares from government so that they can pump in some funds. They paid the money, but the shares was not given to them. Did that come to your attention as president then? And what will you do for companies like that that are finding some of these challenges?
Okay. We'll start with the initiatives for the private sector. And I don't think that you need a business development ministry to promote private sector growth. We had the Ministry of Trade that was handling aspects of it, finance was handling aspects of it, and all that. And I think that is sufficient. I don't see what the Business Development Ministry really has done in terms of boosting private sector growth. I already said that when I come, I'm going to close down some useless ministries. It's one of those I categorize as the useless ministries. And so sanitation and all of them are going to melt back into their original ministries. I think that with the 23 ministries we had, they did more work in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of private sector growth, than the current 100 and something that we have. Business development, Ministry of Procurement. You know, what do you need a Ministry of Procurement for? When you have a whole authority dealing with procurement, you know, sanitation, meanwhile the sanitation is worse than it has ever been before. You know, so some of these things really are not necessary. Monitoring and evaluation, I don't know what monitoring of what. You know, you can monitor from the presidency. You can have a monitoring and evaluation unit in the presidency. In Professor Mills's time, Tony Edu was in charge of monitoring and evaluation. He was in the ministry. He was a presidential staffer in charge of monitoring and evaluation. You don't need a whole ministry for that. You know, then you have aviation, you have railways, you have all in Ministry of Transport, manned by two women, Jifa Ativo and Joyce Bauer. And they did far more work than I'm seeing under 3 separate ministries with 6 ministers, minister and deputy, minister and deputy, exactly 7. So some things, I mean, it's if you ask people to sacrifice and cut their coats, you understand, the government must be seen to be doing it. You must reduce government expenditure, you know, so that people know that you are sacrificing along with them. If you balloon Office of the President expenditure to 1.9 billion, you know, you can pay some of, you go and dig dams, the dams are drying up, you know, and then 1 month that water will finish. So it's used for livestock watering and then also for washing clothes and other things. But really, and that's what I was asking before when we were campaigning, that what kind of dams are you talking about? Are they dugouts? So I was about, you know, dugouts. And we all have been doing dugouts. When I was in office, we did 100 and something dugouts, you know, under the Ghana Social Opportunities, GSOP and others. We did a lot of dugouts all over. And those dugouts have been more viable than the current dugouts, you know. And then the minister is frustrated. She says, 250,000, what kind of dam do you want? Do you want a Kosovo? But who put the budget of 250,000? You do dams for them. They didn't say how much the dam will be. When you came, you said, oh, 250,000 per dam. And if 250,000 per dam cannot do a proper dam, are you blaming the people for complaining? You know, those are some of the things. New plants closing down. Many private sector companies are closing down. A businessman told me, he said several people are moving their businesses to Cote d'Ivoire. And some are closing shop and leaving because the economic situation is not conducive to a lot of things. If you put your ears down, speak to the private sector, speak to the private businessmen, they'll tell you that their businesses are collapsing. It is a fact. I speak to the businessmen. Let the president call businessmen and sit with them alone quietly and ask them, how is your business? And he will hear the tales of woe that people are going through. And so the government should not delude itself and say everything is rosy, it's never had the economy better. The economy is not better. You are cooking the books, creative accounting, and creating the impression that the economy is better. But the reality will hit you. And he says, if you're cooking the books, the reality of the economy will push you. And the reality of the economy is exposing this government. Speak to any businessman and he'll tell you times are hard. Business is not doing good. You know. Let's see. Should we take? It looks like we've exhausted.
Yeah, I think I have a few questions.
Okay, we'll just take shortly 2 more and then I'll wrap up.
Okay, I would want to talk about the new bank note. I want to find out if both the Bank of Ghana and the new, government actually made a huge mistake, or you think it's a good thing implementing that currency. You know, I think the central bank has a great technocrat, you know, and have professional men and women in that sector, and very knowledgeable, you know. And I want to find out from you, what would you have done differently that would not result in the collapsing of, how do I even say it, about the new currency, you know?
Okay.
Of course. What's your take, and what would you have done differently?
I think it was unnecessary to introduce the new notes. And the Bank of Ghana did not go through the procedures that we normally go through when we're introducing new notes. Notice is given in advance that these new notes are coming. And they give us the reason why the new notes are coming. Long before the notes come, they give us specimen of the notes. They are going to be in this configuration. These are going to be the what. Before the notes arrive, it takes time before the notes arrive. This time, you know what happened? By the time they were informing Ghanaians that they were going to give us new notes, the new notes were in the country. They had been received, had been wet. Why would you want to ambush Ghanaians if what you're doing is legitimate? Ask anybody with inside knowledge. Those new notes were here before Ghanaians were informed that new notes were coming. Why did the banks refuse to accept them? Because there's a procedure you go through. You send an official notice from Bank of Ghana to the banks that these new notes are coming and that we are going to supply you with this number of new notes. These are the specifications. The banks prepare and they receive the notes and they put them into the system. There are people who received the notes and were spending the notes even before the banks saw the notes. I mean, how is that possible? People were spending the notes already even before official banks had received the supply. All of us go to the banks and they say, oh, the new notes have come. Would you want it in new notes or you want the old notes? And then you say, oh, okay, give me some new notes. And then you take it. So where did these people get the new notes and started spending even before the banking system had gotten the notes? And the point is, I announced in 2015 that we were working towards a cashless society. And that it was my intention that by the year 2020, we will not accept notes and currency for payment of government business. And that if you wanted to pay government business, you either use a check or you did a transfer direct to government. And so we're going to discourage the use of cash in transactions. We said that you can't take third-party checks of more than 5,000 off the bank counter. That is to reduce paying huge amounts of money everywhere. So what is the sense in making it easier for them to carry huge amounts of money? Because now with the 200 notes and things, you are encouraging a more cash use in the society. Because if I have to come and pay you, formerly the hassle of packing banknotes in my car boot and bringing it and sitting with you and counting it was a big hassle. And so I just tell you, I said, look, let's go to the bank. Let me do a direct transfer to your account. And then I do it. You go, your account is credited and all that. Now I can go to the bank, take the 200 notes. It will fit in a small bank. I come and put it there to you. You count it. And it's going to encourage the use of more cash. And the point I even made is, we've signed on to the ECHO. We have a new currency coming. What is the need to rush to introduce 100 and 200 notes? Today, we're having difficulty with those notes because you can't use it in the market. The whole market woman's capitalization, selling her okro, is 200 cedis. And you go and you're buying okro or something and you are holding 200 cedis. Her whole capital is not up to the 200 cedis you are using to buy the okro. And they say, no, it's for big transactions. But why would you make it easier to do those big transactions in cash? If they are big transactions, they should be done cashless. Big transactions must be cashless. It is the small transactions that you need cash. And 50 was the best note. Look at the dollar. The highest note is 100. And it has been 100 for God knows how long. Meanwhile, everybody uses dollar. The dollar, they could have introduced 200 and 500 notes. Euro introduced 500 notes. They've withdrawn it. They've withdrawn the 500 notes for euro. You can't have 500 notes for euro now. And so everybody is keeping lower notes to prevent, more cash transactions. Unfortunately, we are making it easier to do. You are the last person. Yes, quickly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I already have mentioned this issue, but because you brought it up again, one of the ministries that you have tagged useless is the sanitation ministry. And coming from the sanitation sector also, I've heard the reactions, and it is not only the minister who is not happy, but the people, the NGOs in the sanitation sector are also not happy. And one of the things that has not come out clearly is what you will do in the absence of a sanitation ministry, how you handle sanitation. And then the last one is, and this one, if I don't ask it, I'll be whipped in the office.
Okay.
In government, you've had an economic relationship. Ghana has had an economic relationship. Ghana's relationship with China. If you get opportunity to become president again. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Very quickly. We've run out of time, so I just... China has been a partner of Africa. I'll just say all African countries. We normally have the Africa-China Summit, where China pledges, a certain amount of money to assist African development. It's from China that you will get the kind of money that you need to do some of your infrastructure projects. You will not get that from many of the Western countries. And it's a very useful partner going forward. And I think that we must continue to abrogate it. And then the second one had to do with the deportation of some Chinese illegal miners. We deported almost 5,000 Chinese illegal miners. It was a very difficult decision to make, but I mean, looking at what was happening, we had no choice but to do it. But I mean, our overall relationship remained good, but I mean, those were the two little blimps that we had. But I think that, I mean, we respect China. China has been a developing country, and China has always stood by developing countries, our traditional allies, America, UK, and we have cooperation with all of them. UK, France, America, we were cooperating with them in the fight against terrorism, and so they were helping us with training and other things. So our relations with all countries are good, and we must make the best of any relationship that we have with any country. Sanitation, the point why I'm saying that the sanitation ministry is useless is that sanitation is a central function of local government, and sanitation is the core function of district assemblies. And so district assemblies are under the Ministry of Local Government. And so why would you take the core function of the local government and put it in a different ministry and have a different ministry administering the local government? And that's what I'm saying. When I win, I'll take sanitation back and make it continue to be the core function of district assemblies. Because it doesn't help to have it sitting somewhere by itself when the management of the district assemblies is also sitting in a different ministry. So bring it back and put it where it belongs and keep it as the core function of the district assemblies, increase their capacity, resources to be able to do the sanitation properly, and not have a minister sitting somewhere appropriating resources to a different ministry to do sanitation. What kind of sanitation are they going to do? And so we'll put it back in the local government ministry where it belongs. The district assemblies will be the focal points for keeping sanitation in their districts. It makes it easier if you decentralize sanitation, and it is the responsibility of the district to make sure that their district is clean. You are better able to manage it than if you put it under a national ministry that has a national overview of what sanitation should be. And inputs must be commensurate to output. And so if you look at outputs of a sanitation ministry, a minister, technocrats, everything separate, what is the output? Our city's cleaner. Name one major sanitation achievement that this Ministry of Sanitation has done. And yet when it was under local government, we did the liquid waste plants, Mudo. We closed down Lavender Hill when sanitation ministry was under local government. Today they no longer pour raw feed, compost plants to receive waste, and sort it out. We did it under the Ministry of Local Government. We provided skip trucks to all the district assemblies to be able to collect their achievement that's under sanitation. It has done better than it did when it was a component of local government. And so I'm saying that I believe that it is better under local government. And if I win, that sanitation ministry is going back under local government. Thank you very much. Thanks all of you for joining me again today. It's been engagement of the Ghanaian economy under this administration. It is obvious that this government's reckless borrowing with abandon and misreporting of financial figures could have dire implications for our country. But for the IMF, these figures would not have been given to the international community. Needless to say, we have also raised similar issues about deliberate misreporting, but government will just not listen. There's an urgent need to change course and provide hope, certainty, sustainable progress, and opportunities for all Ghanaians. To the many Ghanaians who are reeling under severe economic hardships as a result of poor socioeconomic policies, I urge you not to despair, do not lose hope, keep hope alive. With the mandate that, God willing, we would be receiving from you in December this year, 2020, we'll bring prudence and discipline back to the management of the economy. We'll weed out corruption, we'll drastically cut down on the size of government, and above all, we'll remain honest and truthful to you. We will not deceive you. We will tell you what the plain truth is. We'll also ensure progress in the economy. We'll bring considerable relief to Ghanaians through our fiscal policies. We'll ensure stability in the currency. And additionally, we shall implement business-friendly policies through various incentives and eradicate the nepotistic approach of the current administration to payment of contractors and other business people who open the opportunities of this country to all Ghanaians, notwithstanding your politics or your ethnicity or wherever you come from. Furthermore, borrowing shall be kept in check, and funds so borrowed will be channeled into capital expenditure and productivity that benefits the generality of Ghanaians and adds value to the economy. I've indicated in previous sections that we'll dedicate our first year in office to complete abandoned projects before we start new projects. We'll wage a consistent battle against hardship and bring down the cost of living. We'll create permanent and dignifying jobs for the teeming youth, not ad hoc ones. This will create digital jobs, and through major capital investment in health and education, we shall offer additional job opportunities for health and education sector workers. To investors and researchers out there, let me assure you once again, under my watch, economic and financial data will not be massaged. They will not be obfuscated to present a rosier picture than what is the case. We believe in this, and we believe with this we shall restore dignity, credibility, and certainty to the Ghanaian economy, and your investments will be secure. We shall carry out a comprehensive review of the banking sector crisis, budget for and pay in full all depositors whose funds are locked up and are going through suffering. We shall pay you in full. And so once again, I thank you for joining me this evening. And let me say a special thanks to that we have enjoyed. I thank you and see you all another time. Thank you very much.
The land is good, the land is fine.